Yes.
So you guys both been here before. We'll start with the bio and then we'll get into a bunch of questions. Please feel free to interject or you can rebut or respond to something your opponent says. And
we're going to 11:30 next one?
Probably.
11:15-ish?
11:30?
At least 11, we'll see.
At least 11, okay.
Yeah. Brian, you ready? So let's get started. Speaker, you go first, please. Your bio, the office you're running for, your partisan affiliation, and take it away.
Yeah, well, I'm Tina Kotek. I'm running for governor in the Democratic primary. I am the former Speaker of the Oregon House. I served there for 9 years, 15 years in the Oregon legislature, and a proud resident of North Portland.
So I keep wanting to say that since you were essentially elected Speaker in 2012, right?
13.
I thought you were elected in the elections after the 2012 election.
Well, so House Democrats returned to the majority in 2012 election, but it isn't until the first day of the session that you are elected by your peers to be Speaker. So that would be...
The caucus held its election in 2012. No?
Probably within the first month of the election.
I want to say 10 years. You're not helping me. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, I was the nominee selected by the... I don't know, you were there. I was the nominee selected by the caucus in 2012. So,
okay,
yeah.
right.
But you're not officially Speaker until you're elected.
Please.
Speaker designee.
Yeah, Speaker designee.
Nominee, yes.
Yeah, Speaker designee. Yeah, there you go.
So tell us about where you grew up and how you got to Oregon.
Oh, you want the whole shebang?
Condensed.
Everybody's read your article. What do you
Condensed.
Okay. I'm born and raised in Pennsylvania, but most importantly moved to Oregon in 1987. Moved out here after I dropped out of college, came out here a little bit on a whim, but moved to Eugene. The state has been my home for years. I did move away for graduate school, but it's a place that has really allowed me to be who I am. I'm an advocate. 20 plus years ago, I started what I consider my public service career here in Oregon at Oregon Food Bank. I was a public policy advocate. Fun fact, that's not what I started. The way I made my way through college is I'm a really good typist, so I started as an administrative assistant at Oregon Food Bank. But within the first 6 months of being there was a vacancy in their advocacy department because I had been providing the staffing for that. So I became one of their public policy advocates, and my job was to try to figure out how we could keep people from having to need emergency food. And one of my jobs was to go around the state talking to folks about why they needed to come in for a food box. And it was never about the food. It was about, I don't make enough. Housing's too expensive. Back in the day, this is pre-Obamacare, a lot of medical debt. People were just, buried in bills from medical conditions. And since then, it's all been about how do you improve the systems to make sure people don't need that? How do we make it so people can be self-sufficient, that they can have what they need, they don't need emergency food? After Oregon Food Bank, I went to Children First for Oregon, did work on public policy for children's issues, mostly children's health insurance. Again, back in the day, we were pushing hard to make sure every kid in the state could have access to health insurance. I did work on child care, child welfare, child abuse issues. And part of my job was to go to the legislature to work on these issues. That was my full-time job, but I did lots of reports and things like that. 2004, I ran for the Oregon legislature. I lost that race. 2 years later, literally a mile from where I had been before, ran a second time in 2006, entered the legislature in 2007, and became Speaker in 2013, as you mentioned, and became the longest serving Speaker in the Oregon history, not intentionally, but yes, that is a true fact. So there you go.
You told me that you nearly left politics after the 21 session, or were thinking about not. So how did you get from nearly leaving politics to running for governor?
Well, certainly in 2019, we'd had a really successful session, passing the Student Success Act. My primary bills were around housing, passing, bills to allow for mental housing, for rent stabilization, for housing analysis. I mean, a lot of things that I had worked on for years we had accomplished in 19. We were still trying to get the carbon pollution bill done in 2020. If you remember that totally blew up because of the Republican walkout. And then the pandemic hit. right? And everybody's lives changed. And for me, what it came down to, looking at what was the challenges for the state, making sure we could keep people alive, making sure we could move services. So I did seek the speakership again in 21 for the 21 session. And again, I thought that was probably it for me. And then last summer, my wife and I looked around and we said, there are too many things going on in the state. You have experience to do this job. You should think about doing it. And we made the decision to, take on the challenges that are now facing the state, from housing to climate change to, my wife's a social worker. We've had long conversations about the mental health system. And it was a joint decision to say, I should use my skills and my experience over the years to help solve a few more problems.
Great. Tobias?
I'm Tobias Reed. I have the honor of serving as state treasurer. Also served in the legislature for 10 years, representing the Beaverton area. Worked at Nike and the U.S. Treasury Department. Fortunate to be married to a person who's much smarter and better looking than me, and a better person in many, many ways.
She is very nice, I would
That's true. We have a daughter who's in 7th grade, a son who's in 3rd grade. We live in the Beaverton area, and I'm ready for governor because I feel like we are missing a lot of potential in Oregon. Our good intentions are not matched with execution to follow through. We need to deliver results to people, and we can see how the status quo is not working in Oregon right now. And I'm excited about bringing the experience I've had in the legislature and in the treasurer's office to those questions.
And we talked a little bit about this the other day, but for the benefit of everybody who wasn't on that conversation, you say the status quo isn't working. Why isn't it working?
I think we look around. We can see the number of people who are on the sidewalks, who are in unsafe conditions, the number of people who are being injured and killed, gun violence, the uncertainty around schools, all of those things.
Right, that's the evidence that it's not working. But why?
Because we're not following through. Because we pass bills, we appropriate money, we don't execute on them. We send these programs off to agencies that aren't prepared, that aren't executing, that don't have the people and the accountability, and we're not smart about those things. We chase headlines and move from idea to idea rather than sticking with a consistent vision and executing.
Is that a criticism of the current governor, or are you also lumping the last speaker in with that?
It's a criticism of where we are in Oregon, and I think there's plenty of blame to go around. I think there is reason to feel to need to summon some urgency. If we're satisfied with this, then I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think that's where voters are. I don't think that's where we should be as a state. If we're continuing to accept this, we're sort of admitting that we're okay with mediocrity, that we're okay with our neighbors living on the sidewalk and being in unsafe conditions. We're okay with the really low achievements and numbers with respect to education. We're at record highs in gun violence. If we're not saying,
so name one person you think is responsible for this.
I don't think it's one person. I think it's all of us.
Yeah. Okay. So you mean me?
I think we all have yes. I think we all have a responsibility in this.
I can accept blame, but is there anyone who accepts more blame than me?
Sure. People who are in positions to make decisions, who are in positions.
So you can't say Kate Brown?
I can say, yes, I can say Kate Brown to some extent. I can say all of us who are in those positions to make decisions, to follow through on execution, to not say, oh, I've passed the bill, I'm done. It's not acceptable to say we're going to send off rental assistance to the Housing and Community Services Agency, and then, they didn't get it out. It's stuck at the agency. That is the legislature, that is the governor, that's everyone who has an opportunity to make sure that we're delivering.
Speaker, do you accept that? Tobias is blaming you without naming you. Do you?
I share the treasurer's frustration. No doubt about it. It's one of the reasons I'm running. I'm not going to bore you with all the details although I might get asked. As Speaker, my job was to pass legislation, work with lots of different parties to get very important things done, work on the details, work on the timelines, make sure that when we said we're investing money to do X, Y, and Z because it's important to Oregonians, you do that work with the expectation it gets done. And it's not happening. So I'll give you my particular frustration for the week. There's been a lot of coverage this week on Measure 110. Measure 110 was approved by the voters. And we can debate whether it was a good idea or not, but it was massively supported by Oregonians. They took the decision into their own hands to say, it makes more sense to give people access to treatment than throw them into jail every time they're caught with a little bit of drugs, okay? The promise of that measure was to have services and more services. We all know the numbers. A lot of need, not a lot of service here in Oregon. It's unacceptable. So that's why I worked last year with my colleagues to make sure we put more investment in mental health and behavioral health services, and made sure that 110, when it came out of the ballot, we had to pass legislation to implement it. It needed some tweaking. Look, no ballot measure is ever perfect. And there were really aggressive timelines in there. And we're like, okay, let's make sure this is functional. My office, I actually hired someone just in my office to do policy work on mental health work. I hired someone away from OHA, Annalise Dolph, to come and do these issues. We tracked that thing day after day after day to make sure 110 was going to get implemented. We actually moved money early in the session, which is unusual for us, to do initial grants for community organizations to start building capacity for more recovery services.
So why is it that Oregon does so poorly in terms of offering mental health services?
Let me come back to that question. Let me finish 110, but I do want to answer that question. So we built these timelines in. They were aggressive. We all knew that. January is when OHA was supposed to move the money out. They're now talking about October. That is completely unacceptable. People are dying right now because those dollars, we said to providers, we're going to ramp up capacity around the state. I know it's complicated. I know they got 300 grant requests. But when the governor says, I didn't appoint the council, go talk to OHA, no way. It's your job to make sure the money goes out. So I am not happy about that. It is unacceptable. And it takes 90 days for most contracts. So they haven't even decided who's getting the money yet. And then it's going to take another 90 days for contracting. It just not acceptable. So why we're here, and here's what the conversation I've had with my wife. Couple things, and you'll see this a little bit in my housing plan. We have only, I think, to this biennium, really kind of restored where we were in terms of funding from the Great Recession. And that's a longer conversation, but there were a lot of budget cuts. So we have a very fragile mental health system to begin with. We're not paying people enough. Their caseloads are too big. There's administrative bloat, there's not good system coordination, and there's a lot of need. So,
but again, why are we worse than every other state in the country?
I think it's a combination of need and service, right? The demand for, let's be really clear. We're very happy in the state to talk about drinking, marijuana. This is the culture we live in, right? But if people are going to use substances and then they have an abuse problem, we have to make sure services are there. That's why I've been a big proponent of making sure problem gambling is handled in the state. If we're going to have a lottery, it's not enough to say 1% of lottery goes to problem gambling. It's to actually be implemented, right? This is the balance you provide. If we want to give people freedom of choice to do the things they're going to do, and if they run into a problem where they have an addiction, we have to make sure the services are there. And I feel like the backside of this is just not happening. So it is both implementation and I think the culture of where we live. That being said, we have to help people.
So the culture of where we live is, I'm not sure what you're getting at. You're getting at that this is a permissive state, and as a consequence, we're going to have more mental health and drug problems in the state. Leaders didn't rise to the occasion to provide the treatment. Is that? Prior to 110, were we in a different situation than most other states in terms of drug legalization?
Let's not talk about drug. We can talk about drug legalization. Let's just talk about alcohol.
Okay.
We promote the alcohol industry here pretty heavily,
And so than other states.
I think so. But we do less.
Are you saying there's Pinot Noir alcoholism?
She may not have read that article.
I have read that article.
Oh, Faye said she read that article.
I did read that article. I have so many things to say about that, but I won't. But here's what I would say. What I think we see in other states is there's more of a public health focus on alcohol prevention, alcohol use prevention, education. I would say our budget is substantially lower than other states. I can't prove that, but let me go back and check and get you that number.
Do you think that...
So I think it's a combination, right? Use and education prevention should be happening in the schools, and I doubt that it's happening as much as it is in our states.
So how do you feel about the state being in the alcohol business? If promoting alcohol, and we do have higher uses of alcohol and most drugs in this state than most other states.
Well, I'm not advocating prohibition. What I'm advocating for is making sure there's a balance of education and awareness and treatment
We're
when you
not
get
talking
it.
about prohibition, we're talking about privatization. It's almost sure to be on the ballot this year.
Privatization?
So do you support the state?
I do not support the privatization method.
Why not?
Well, because I just think it's about a way for large corporations to make more money. I can tell you what I don't hear about from my colleagues and constituents, that they can't get alcohol in the state.
Uh-huh.
That's not an issue.
But
This is about people being able to make more money at Costco and other
But
places.
you talked about us promoting alcohol use in the state, and the fact is the state's got a direct financial incentive to promote alcohol, because the more it promotes, the more money it gets.
I don't, so it is the way our system we have now in terms of selling alcohol, right, with the private liquor agents and,
Yeah.
all I'm saying is it's not an issue.
Okay.
Right? This idea, what you're going to hear from the privatization argument is that, oh my gosh, we just have to make it easier for people to go buy alcohol. I haven't heard anyone come up to me and say that's a problem. You can buy beer and wine wherever. The liquor agents are, they've improved their customer service. I'm just saying the privatization argument is all about profits for the big companies.
So let's move on. Can we just take a minute and deal with Nigel's story, and then we can move on? Would love to get both of you to respond to the ultimate analysis of Nigel's story, which is the big enigma. Why is it that you...
Which, I'm sorry, you mean the profile of me?
Yeah. Why is it that you don't have more support you do from the people who have worked with you or former governors? Nigel offered some suggestions. Feel free to say he's right or wrong, and I'd love to hear your point of view. But it is to voters a bit of a puzzle.
Well, I do think that's the framing of the story. But let me just say this.
Well, wait. There's some very basic facts. No standing governor, current or former, has endorsed you. Peter Courtney has not endorsed you.
Peter Courtney is not endorsing in the primary. So let's talk about, excuse me if I can answer, my endorsements.
No.
No.
What I'm asking you to respond to is Nigel talked to people who said, here are the reasons why these people aren't endorsing Tina.
5 people?
And
4?
I just want to...
How many people did you talk to that said they're not endorsing me? I have 60 current and former elected
With all due
leaders who are
respect, Tina,
endorsing
please
me.
be responsive to my question.
But I don't agree with the premise.
Well,
premise
then
is
fine, then
saying...
let's walk through the premise.
Okay.
So walk through what Nigel, and it was obviously more than 5 people who talked to, who provide an assessment of why they think you have less than fulsome support. Can't be trusted, too liberal for the state. I'm sure you've got the story memorized.
Is that why the 2 governors are not endorsing me?
Walk through in your mind why you think you don't have support from those folks.
Well, I'm not going to speculate why, but I can probably guess, at least in the terms of Governor Kitzhaber. I asked him to resign. Why would he endorse me?
Okay.
I don't think that's a surprise.
The current governor?
The current governor's not endorsing anybody. I think I take issue with the premise that when people don't endorse, it's because it's a problem with me. This is a Democratic primary. Some people are not endorsing.
For the record, you dispute the analysis in Nigel's cover story.
I would say I would reframe it and say, there are some people who are not endorsing me.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, if you look at the number of people who are endorsing me, who are currently elected or formerly elected, it's substantially larger than Treasurer Reed's. Couple other things. You don't get to be speaker for 9 years if you can't work with people. You don't get to have the success in the legislature that I've had if you don't know how to, build relationships. There are people who might disagree with some of the decisions I've made and might not be endorsing me because of that. I think that's fair. I've been in public office a long time. But more importantly, let's look at the things that he and I have competed for specifically. When you run for public office, there are lots of process about organizational endorsements. Why the organizational endorsements are important is because you fill out questionnaires, you interview with people. These are individuals who, do they have a working relationship with you? I have worked with organizations across the state for more than a decade. They know what I can do. They know they can trust me. They know that I can get things done. We competed for those endorsements. And they're not only important, maybe from a political standpoint. These are thousands of Oregonians in these organizations who are represented through these processes. So when you're a supporter of Planned Parenthood of Oregon and they endorse you, it's because the members of the Planned Parenthood network of supporters know that you can get the job done. when you're supported by the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, thousands of people who support OSV because of the work I've done
Understood.
support me. So I'm just saying, it's like,
Understood.
I think
So just- I wanna let
here's
you-
my list of endorsements, here is his.
Understood.
So
And
I just want to be
wanna
really
get
clear.
Tobias respond, but I guess what I want to know is when you read Nigel's story, was there any of that in a moment of self-reflection that you said, you know, that's actually an accurate piece of constructive criticism? It sounds like it's not.
No, that's not a fair assessment of what I said.
Okay.
What
I'll
I
give you an
would
opportunity.
say is, I am not surprised, given the hard decisions you have to make as Speaker of the Oregon House, in the many years that I've been in public service,
Right.
that some people might not like me.
Understood. Were you
I-
not surprised at the reasons why people didn't endorse you?
No,
as
I think
stated?
those are all publicly known situations. I don't think there was anything new I mean, the people who expressed their concerns, I think they're pretty well known.
Okay.
I mean, I wasn't surprised. I mean, I didn't see someone's like, wow, I'm surprised at that. I mean, I'm aware that not everybody likes you when you make hard decisions.
Okay. Tobias, you may not want to weigh in on this, but
Well, I would say a couple of things. In a lot of cases, it's not thousands of people who participate in endorsement processes. It's a handful of people, and there are really, that matters, the personalities that are involved there. And I think there are, a section of people, a selection of people in organizations who are pretty happy with the way things are. And those people are likely to support the people who have created that situation. I don't think that's reflective of voters. And I think it is significant that the two people who have served as governor and who have chosen to participate as an endorser are endorsing me. These are people who know what it takes to do that job, and that is significant.
okay. Let me ask one more question that I bio, which is on campaign finance reform. I mean, every day we check the tallies. These elections are swimming in money.
Yeah.
We're a little jealous, but we also wonder if this is in the interest of citizens. Honestly, campaign finance reform, you both have talked a good game, haven't really done much. How should voters think about you and campaign finance reform?
I think this will be the last governor's race without campaign limits, and I hope so. We should have had them when the Oregon House passed campaign limits in 19. I made sure we went to the ballot with a constitutional change to make it crystal clear that campaign finance limits are allowed under the Oregon Constitution, and voters passed that. Look, there are a lot of things we're working on. And as Speaker, every time there was I did everything I could in my power to get it done. I can't help the Senate didn't pass it. I can't help it didn't get to the governor's desk. But I do believe in campaign
So you're
finance.
making the case that you strongly believe in campaign finance
do.
reform, even though your history has suggested less than full-throated support, but that's okay. So the point is, is your support for this because of the belief that money is corrupting politics? I'm being sort of wide-eyed and naive here, and given that you've raised as much money as you have, how are you resisting being corrupted?
The reason that I think we need campaign finance limits is I do believe voters are losing confidence in the system when they equate contributions with corruption.
And
That's a problem. I also think that the cost of elections, and I've been, I've been involved in elections for many years now. The cost of elections continue to escalate because it used to be, when I first started this, you did a little mail, maybe a little TV, few emails. Now, every mode of communication you have to do. Not only the things you used to do, but the things like more social media. It's exponential of all the ways you have to reach voters. And because we have no limits, we can just keep pouring more and more money into this. At some point, the per voter amount of money is getting ridiculous. And that is also, because I think that keeps people from running when it is so expensive. I think we need limits plus some version of public financing if we can figure it out, because I think that combination will get a different set of folks running for office. So we got to get there. And I would take issue that, look, I've worked on so many issues, I can't be at the front of every issue, but anytime there's a campaign finance reform bill, I supported and made it happen in the Oregon House. So I don't know how else to say that. I don't know, you didn't get a chance to talk about it.
Well, you didn't answer my question. I want to know how money has corrupted you. You obviously believe money corrupts the system.
I think it reduces confidence in the system. I think the perception of corruption is there.
So there's a perception
Sure,
that
don't you
two are
think?
corrupted by
There's a
money.
perception,
But
sure.
the reality is, you've got the ability to take money from anybody and turn around and screw them.
I don't know how to respond to that. I don't know how to respond to that.
I'm quoting Willie Brown.
Okay, good to know. What I would say is, I think folks who contribute to candidates in general want to support people they believe can do the job. And I think it gets a little ridiculous. I mean, I don't understand why Phil Knight thinks giving $1 million to Betsy Johnson's a good idea. Go ask him. But I know you wanted to weigh in. I don't think my opponent has been as strong on campaign finance as I have. So.
But
Well, I'm perfectly fine with campaign finance reform, but I think it's naive to think that alone is the panacea. I had the experience of managing a legislative campaign in the one cycle when there were contribution and expenditure limits in Oregon in 1996. And I'll never forget what we did first thing almost every day, which was to go to the post office and search through the recycling bins, because that gave us a day or maybe 2 day head start on what people would receive at home. They'd get them in their P.O. boxes and put them in the recycling bins. So it didn't change the volume of communication with voters, it just changed who was saying things. And because we were complying with those rules, we didn't know what other people were going to say in our race about us, against us, for us, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's fine, but I don't think we get to say now we have limits and everything is solved. And the way this experience is a challenge for me is I have to spend a lot more time doing that than in developing policy proposals and connecting with voters and hearing what's on their mind. Some people like the fundraising part. I'm willing to do it, but I don't get as much fulfillment from that, and I don't get to think about how to develop an agenda and the coalitions that are going to be required as much.
Can you tell me a politician who does like that?
Someone what?
Can you give me an example of an elected official who does like the fundraising? I think I've only heard people gripe about it.
Well, I remember listening to the audio version of Al Franken's memoir, in which he describes creating a musical in his head about fundraising.
All right. So for the benefit of everyone else in the room, both Nigel and I have had this conversation at least once with you, but can you take us through your thinking on why you initially voted to sell the Elliott, why you changed your mind, and then what your impact has been on creating a compromise solution? Sure.
So I dropped into the middle of a discussion that had been ongoing in Oregon for decades about how the Elliott Forest was in a really difficult situation between its constitutional obligation to generate revenue for the Common School Fund and the other limitations on the forest. When the coastal coho and the marble murrelet, the spotted owl, were discovered there, the intended relationship between the students of Oregon and the forest was reversed. So it was the students who were subsidizing the forest. So the previous land board had embarked on a process to sell the forest to a coalition of interests, including one of the tribes. And my first meeting, I was asked to reject that proposal. As a treasurer, I was immediately a fiduciary to the Common School Fund. I didn't think we could abandon that plan without a viable alternative in place. So I offered a number of what I thought were improvements to the plan that the previous land board, including Governor Brown, Secretary of State Brown, had developed. When those were not accepted, I didn't think that we could reject that proposal without that alternative plan.
The environmentalists think you campaigned on not selling it. What changed once you were in office?
It didn't change. That was not my preferred alternative, but the previous land board had begun this proposal. And during my campaign, I was clear about my priorities. But as a fiduciary, we needed to develop an alternative. So I tried that with the amendments that I proposed. And when those were not accepted, I went to work on creating an alternative. And where we are now, 5 years later, is a result of really diligent and persistent effort to get those details right. connecting with Oregon State, making sure that we have the decoupling mechanisms in place. We're on the cusp now of having the largest research forest in North America that's going to allow us to figure out how to practice sustainable forestry, to interact with carbon markets, to deal with the endangered species that are there, and to be consistent with an industry that is a big part of our past and our future. And I think people recognize that the role I played in connecting Oregon State into that process and behind the scenes work of getting those details right, keeping that coalition together is really significant.
I think I have one last question on this,
Sure.
which is, OLCV says they ran their most expensive campaign to get you to switch from a sell vote to a keep vote. Coos County Commissioner Melissa Cribbins talked about how once there was a vote to sell, like there was public outcry, and her she praised you for changing your vote there. But I'm wondering what part public outcry played in you changing your vote.
My intent all along was to say this has been a problem going back decades, and I don't want to be part of a process that just kicks that problem into the future. We may not be successful, but I want to call the question in a way that actually gives us a chance to create a lasting solution. And I'm proud of what we've done there. I don't think anybody would design that sequence that we went through to get there, but we're in a good spot now.
So, but that doesn't quite answer my question. Are you saying it didn't, like public outcry after that vote didn't have an impact on where you were headed? You were always headed in that direction?
I was always headed in that direction, and I was glad that people were paying attention and interested in that. I think when it becomes urgent, when it becomes a question that people are really paying attention, by forcing a broader set of questions, by bringing more coalition partners into the discussion, we were able to broaden that solution space and create some other alternatives that if we just said, all right, we're just going to postpone it, kick it down the road further, maybe we wouldn't have gotten to where we are now.
Can I just ask one quick question? Tobias, you served in leadership with Speaker Kotek. There are people who perceive the speaker to be excessively close to the public employee unions, particularly SEIU. What's your perception?
That's a question that's probably best asked of her.
Well, no, I'm asking you.
I know, but I don't know her relationship in the same way.
Well, you were sitting in the leadership meetings with her for several years. What did you perceive at that time?
I perceived it to be a close relationship.
Too close?
Compared to what? I think we have to be willing to stand up to our friends, and I've certainly done that. I don't think there's. I wish there were some more examples of that from the former speaker. I think it is a mark of a successful governor to say no to friends from time to time, and that's something that bothers me about what the next governor is going to have to do. We have a history in Oregon, particularly of late, of saying yes to all kinds of good intentions, the dream of all these things that we want to do. But we're not as good at saying no right now and saying, no, we have a few key priorities that we have to do first before we get to our other aspirations. And I think the setup of a lot of institutional endorsers are based on a set of expectations, and I don't know that we're going to be able to meet all those expectations. We talk a good game, but we're lacking in execution and follow through.
Can you give us an example of a time when you thought the speaker acted in SEIU's interest rather than the public interest?
I have to think about that in terms of a specific one, but I think that long running relationship can play out in lots of different ways that aren't always in the interest of the state.
Such as?
I can't think of one at the moment, but I have to think about that for a minute.
Speaker, would you like to respond?
Well, I think one of the things that voters need to understand about the work that I do is, at the end of the day, it's about doing the best public policy that will improve people's lives. I mean, Tobias and I, we were whips together, we counted votes together, he was in the leadership team, he was my pro tem for a couple years. We've worked together very closely. I think he understands that when people need help, you have to step up. And a lot of the years, I've been very aligned with folks who want to stand up for working Oregonians. That's why I have supportive labor unions. I'm proud to be supported by people who understand that when it came down to increasing the minimum wage, I got that over the finish line. When it came to making sure we had paid sick leave for workers, I got that done. When it was about making sure we had equal pay for equal work, I made that happen. I'm like, this is about the average working Oregonian. These are really basic things. These are bread and butter issues. And do public employee unions support those things? They do, because that's broadly important. A lot of their members don't need that, but they support it because it's great for working Oregonians to know that they're going to have a better wage, that they're going to, when they get sick, they can stay home and get paid for it. There are a lot of people in the state, when you told them, it's like, a lot of people can't stay home because they won't get paid. Think if we had not had paid sick leave in place when the pandemic hit, what that would have done to so many workers. So I feel very confident that my track record is about standing up for working folks, and I will never apologize for that.
I'd like to. I'm going to jump in for 1 second. I think what Nigel's driving at, and I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we started this conversation by talking about the disjunct between the policies that Oregon is creating and the results that we're seeing. Mm-hmm. And I think as we try to muddle through that confusion, that disjunct between intentions and results, one of the places in which people think that disjunct may be occurring is that the policies that Oregon is creating are in fact benefiting the people who implement them, the workers for the state employees, more than they're benefiting the people who are receiving the services. So that's, I think, why we're driving at that question so hard, is that public employee unions are representing the people who work for the state to implement Measure 110, to implement housing services. And there's some concern that you are very loyal to them, and in fact more loyal to them than the people receiving the services.
Well, I just would disagree with that. I think it's a flawed analysis of what's going on. Do I believe that it is the rank and file folks in public employment, not just public employees in the state, but across, that they're the problem for the implementation? I put the responsibility on the managers. I put the responsibility on the leadership. Who runs the agency sets the tone. And when you set the tone as an agency director and your direct reports, to have the back of you, the frontline workers who are trying to do the work. I'm not saying every public employee does everything right, but I think there are a lot of public servants who work really hard. When leadership doesn't have a plan, doesn't have a timeline, doesn't ask for the right resources, doesn't say, hey, you're going to have to take a risk to get this thing implemented, but I'll have your back when you do it. What's happening right now is I think public employees are on their heels going like, every time we try to do something, nobody has our back. What I want to see out of agency leadership as the next governor is that we have people who have a plan, have a timeline, know how to get it done, and work it down the line. This is a management issue. So at the end of the day, not a rank and file issue.
I want to.
But that's just that's my feeling of management.
Go from where Aaron was to a question, and then I'll get to you, and you can answer it yourself. But I think that maybe not the primary as much, but looking ahead to the general election, the sort of broadest version of the question, are Oregonians better off than they were 9 years ago or 10 years ago? Are they, from the policies you've passed, or is the explanation that some of those haven't come to fruition yet? Or, because you have a tough argument right now, I think, to say to a lot of people your life is better because of me and Democrats for the last 9 years.
Well, I think what I would say is the last 2 years have been hard and have really shown that we've got some flaws in our system, and it's unacceptable. I mean, every state in the country has had a similar impact, right? No one was prepared for the speed at which we all had to respond to this crisis. And so last year, one of the things that I was supporting with Representative Evans out of Salem was, we need to have an Office of Emergency Management that actually knows how to coordinate. And that's a longer story, but we weren't prepared. We need to fix that. Prior to the pandemic, I do think things were better, but the pandemic, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if things were better. How are things right now? They are not good. Too many people living on the streets. People can't get mental health services. Not acceptable. And I think in a moment of challenge like this, you need someone who actually knows how to bring people together and solve problems. I've done that in the legislature. I understand it's a legislative branch, but I don't think anyone can say that I didn't understand how to go from A to B to solve problems. The executive branch needs that right now, and the state and people in the state need a competent manager, but not just a manager, but a leader. Not someone who's just least offensive. This is about making hard choices and moving the state forward.
Tobias, go ahead.
So I'm glad to hear this interest in management and holding people accountable. But it strikes me that the speaker was the most powerful lawmaker in Oregon for a decade. If she asked an agency leader to show up at her door, they'd be there. Every budget has to go through the House.
You know the separation of powers.
And there is a reason that exists. There's an oversight process. The power of the purse is significant. And I'm glad to hear about this urgency now, but it strikes me as a little hollow 10 years later.
You've indicated that you'd like to reform OHA, unless I'm putting words in your mouth, I got that sense.
Actually, I would not say reform.
Okay.
And I can tell you why.
What word would you use?
I think it's a reevaluation of management. Here's why I don't want to say reform, because under Kitzhaber, there was a previous administrator at OHA who so badly jumbled the divisions. We're still making up for that.
Okay. So the head of OHA might have some job insecurity if you get elected. Not?
Yeah, he should have.
Okay. What other state agencies would you like to, if reform's not the bad word, but that you think are particularly poorly managed and you think aren't servicing Oregonians and you think need focus?
Well, and I think that one of the things I really appreciate the question. So one of the things we have to think about as we recover and try to figure out how to do things, there's this interesting balance between stability and consistency. Because here's the thing in state government. You just can't stop what you're doing. You just can't say, hey, I'm going to take a pause. You still have to do services. At the same time, you have to evaluate and improve and change how you do business. So it's both keeping the ship running, but also making the changes where you don't have a whole bunch of people leave because they don't feel supported. So you have to have this both change at the top, and here's how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to sit down with the agency people and say, tell me how you can show that you know how to move us forward.
But I'd like
right?
to
And if you can't, then we'll have to find somebody
else.
else.
The state bureaucracy, state agencies that in your mind, as of this moment, you think are not functioning correctly.
Well, and I think some agencies are doing fine. So it's not a complete mix. It's a mixed bag. But what I would say is I'm particularly not happy about OHA, particularly behavioral health. Okay. That's been pretty clear in this conversation.
What else?
I think making sure the employment department can actually execute on the paid family medical leave insurance program, which is the strongest program in the country. It needs to get off the ground and serve people. Mm-hmm. So employment would also be, one of those immediate focus. Housing and community services. I've been doing housing for a long time. When we get more money, that rent assistance program has to work better the next time around. There are issues at housing and community services that have to be addressed. And again, I just want to clarify, that's not major management change for the sake of making change. Making sure that the leaders who are there share your vision, share your goals, and have a can-do attitude. It is not acceptable for an agency to say, and I'm not going to quote, I can't meet with you because you hurt my feelings because you went in the paper and said mean things about me. What the hell was that?
Okay.
We have to get stuff done in Oregon. The goal of public service and the goal of state government is to do stuff and to make things work for people. So that's it, right? And we're not doing it right now.
I want to ask Tobias his assessment of agencies, but you didn't talk about the Department of Treasury, so I gather you think that's run exceptionally well.
Well, it's run by a different statewide.
Okay.
I mean, yes, it's part of the executive branch technically, but it's run by a statewide, and so that's a question for him. I'm like, I certainly have some things I can suggest. That's his job.
How well run is the Department of Treasury?
Fantastic.
Okay. What agencies, in your mind, either agreeing with Tina or disagreeing need?
Well, if I'm elected governor, I'm going to ask for everyone's resignation because I think that prompts a question and a conversation about whether we have a basic alignment of
right,
intention.
But there must be some agencies that you're paying attention to and you're down in Salem that you just don't understand why they, or not.
Yeah, I'd agree with all the lists that the former speaker articulated. One that I'm watching with interest because there is new leadership there as the Department of Forestry. I'm particularly concerned about the financing mechanisms that we have used to fight wildfires. They're meant for a bygone era, and we haven't done a very good job of that. I sent a letter to the governor and legislative leadership during the session saying we should use some of these one-time funds to create a mechanism to fund those wildfires. We know they're not going away. We know they're not going to get smaller. That was met with silence.
Well, no, we had Senate Bill 762, which actually did that in the 21 session. So, which session did you send the letter?
In the 21 session.
Well, we did Senate Bill 762.
And 22. Yes, we have not. But what we did not create is a mechanism that can address the cash flow problem. There's a really significant problem there because forestry comes to Treasury and asks for loans from the short-term funds to cover that time frame. And we know that's not going away. The legislature decided not to do that.
Can you each take a minute? You're sitting here in Portland, you're talking to a Portland newspaper, you're well aware that the majority of counties in the state of Oregon voted for Trump. Take a minute and speak to the other Oregon about why you're going to be their governor, not just our governor. I mean, so much of what you both stand for is anathema to a lot of Oregonians. And somehow, I assume, stylistically, you need to try to pull the state together. So, you're in John Day or Baker City or Harney County. What do you tell people?
I tell people, look, I was raised in Idaho. I spent a lot of time coming across the state as a young person when I was in college, and I have a sense of things. It's going to look different in different parts of the state, but ultimately, I think we're all interested in the same kinds of things to make sure that our families and people we care about are healthy and happy and nearby and have some sense of a brighter future. And when we're focused on that, with the humility to say, I'm not here to tell you exactly what that means in your community, but I want to help the state be in a position to remove barriers and give you the support. There are things that are going to be consistent across the state. We've got to do better at getting high-speed internet everywhere. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity, and recognizing that there are regional strengths. If it's precision agriculture, it's mass timber, it's seafood processing, it's offshore wind, all of these things are going to be opportunities. And we can change the narrative from saying an issue of addressing climate is not just a matter of saying if we do all these unpleasant things, the future will be slightly less terrible. There can be really great things as a result too. If we can offer an opportunity to farmers and ranchers and landowners to be compensated for how they increase the carbon content of their soil. If there's revenue to be had from solar and wind, there can be an opportunity to participate in a way that unites people and has urban and rural pulling together. And I think it's a matter of showing up, spending time there, getting to know people, building relationships, and building on that common foundation.
Okay.
Well, what I would say to Oregonians is, I believe the entire state succeeds when every part of the state succeeds. And I really mean that. 20 plus years ago at Oregon Food Bank, I traveled around the state and talked to a lot of folks. And what I came away with is, people want fairness. They just want to have their basic needs accessible to them. They want good health care, they want good schools, they want affordable housing. I'm going to focus on, as your governor, the things that we all want, which is to make sure we have those basic things. That's why when I was your speaker, and I took that as I was the speaker for the entire state, I made sure that House Republicans and House Democrats visited each other's districts, talked to each other, tried to understand what it meant to be living in a place like Klamath Falls versus a place like North Portland. I did that. I went to those parts of the state that were far away from where I was living because I want to hear and listen to what their concerns are. And as your governor, my promise to you is I will always listen. I will be there when you ask me to be there to help lead those conversations with you to solve your problems. It's not all going to get solved in Salem. That's what I recognize as over the years, there are a lot of good ideas in local communities, and the state should be a partner. It should get out of the way if we're in the way, and we have to make sure that everybody has what they need around the state. I'm looking forward to being out of Salem as much as possible because as your governor, I've been a legislator. I understand what the legislature does. I don't need to spend my time in Salem. As the CEO of the state, I want to make sure you're successful, and I look forward to doing that on your behalf and with you.
Speaking of people who don't live in Portland. When was the last time that either of you spoke to Nick Kristoff?
It was about 2.5 weeks ago.
What'd you say?
He talked about how they were going snowshoeing Mount Hood on the Sunday. I think it was a Sunday afternoon. And we talked about, issues in rural economic development, communities, and those kinds of things.
Is he going to endorse you?
He hasn't yet. He said is not ready to.
Probably a month ago, we had coffee in Newburgh for 2 hours. Talked about a whole bunch of things. Gave me a copy of his book. I really appreciate the conversations that he has started and hope that he stays engaged in Oregon. Look, we have plenty of things we have to solve, and he brings perspective that I think is helpful. He's also a great storyteller, and I think we need that. And no, like my understanding is he's not endorsing in the primary, and he's focused on, it's pretty, it's tough to like be all in for something and have it not happen, right? So I think he's trying to figure out what he's doing, but it was a great conversation.
Speaker, some of the Republican candidates are already running ads trying to pin you down as Kate Brown 2.0. Is that an accurate characterization?
I don't think so.
Well, how's it not accurate?
Well, I think voters will be able to tell the difference between candidates. They always have. I'm Tina Kotek. I think.
How are you stylistically or substantively different from Governor Brown?
Well, I think I have a track record in the legislature showing that I can make decisions and move things along.
And she can't make decisions.
Well, I think she has made certain decisions, and I think other things you have to be more engaged with your agencies.
So I've
already talked about that today. So.
You'll be more engaged with.
Absolutely.
Are there any positions or views that are at odds with the governor? I mean, you're talking about execution, which we appreciate, but I'm just wondering in terms of.
I'm sure we've had disagreements over the past.
But nothing substantive that you could point to as saying this is where she and I fundamentally disagree on the role of government in our lives.
Well, we've never had that particular conversation. Values-wise, we believe in reproductive rights. We believe in standing up for workers. I mean, very core democratic values. I do think it is about style more than anything else. But at the end of the day, every election's a new opportunity for people to hire the governor. And I'm not the person who, I want to spend time talking about what we can do versus what's happened.
This is a really small and perhaps not helpful example, but the decision to vaccinate teachers before nursing homes without getting a guarantee that teachers would return to the school.
It wasn't before nursing homes, it was before seniors.
Thank you.
Yeah, because they were already vaccinated in long-term.
She got criticized a lot for that decision.
Yeah, I didn't agree with that.
You did not? Or you did? I'm sorry.
I did not.
I don't think any candidate has said they agreed with that decision. It's not a popular one.
I think that was a hard choice, right? And I think in retrospect, and a lot of this is in hindsight, right? We weren't back in the classrooms after the vaccinations happened. And I think that was the disconnect there. If you're going to make that hard choice, we need to be back in the schools.
Can we talk
and that didn't happen.
Can we talk a little bit about an economic vision for the state? There's been very little talk on the campaign trail, actually surprisingly among Republicans, other than...
Can we have the treasurer distinguish himself from
Kate Brown?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Because I think that's where.
Sure.
And then can I follow up on that after this?
Yeah, go ahead.
We got the whole sequence taken over.
Yeah.
Got it all laid out. I think
he's definitely taller.
it's true. No one's confused us.
Very clearly.
In fact, we had to figure that out. We had the land board meeting this week, the first time we had one in person with this land board, and this is usually an issue, like which chair am I going to sit in, and how do we lower it? It's a seated photo. It's kind of an awkward thing. I actually was going to go this direction even before you talked about economic development and that as a vision. I think we've not seen nearly enough of that as a priority from Governor Brown. We don't. it's not helpful when business leaders and people in the private sector feel like we're waging a rhetorical, if not policy war on economic success and making Oregon hostile to profit in a lot of ways. So that, I think, is a really significant thing. And I would go one step further than the former speaker did with respect to the vaccination question. I was enormously frustrated during the pandemic when we saw bars and restaurants open and not schools open. Having a really consistent and clear sense of priorities, I think, is a contrast for me. I think, again, it's an example of good intentions and trying to do lots of things all at once, but having a clear sense of the things that are going to matter in the sequence is a strength for me.
In our reporting, there were some similarities that people drew between you and Brown. As somebody who is a moderate, as somebody who isn't as well known as the speaker for a big vision of what Oregon should be, can you tell me one thing that voters should expect to be different in 4 years if you're elected than they are now?
I think Oregon will have a better reputation with the private sector as a place that employers want to be and feel like they can expand their businesses, places that they want to grow, that they want to hire people, that they're going to have a better relationship with state government. Not that they'll get whatever they want from state government, but they'll get better service, better quick answers, and feel like it's a place that ought to be on their list, not immediately scratched off as a place that they want to grow.
Anthony?
Yeah, you've talked a lot about the importance of combating climate change, and I know you've been under some pressure, and the Treasury's been under pressure to divest holdings in fossil fuel companies. But as far as I know, you haven't said whether or not you do that. What's your position on divestment from the pension funds and other Treasury funds?
Well, I'm really proud of what we're doing at Treasury. We have reduced the exposure to fossil fuel risk. We've doubled our investments in clean and renewable, and we've added capacity to how we integrate those considerations and those assessments of risk as we make decisions. We're also using our influence as an investor to pressure companies. There are directors on the board at ExxonMobil, because we supported them, who acknowledge the reality of
Are you talking
climate
about
catastrophe.
The guys from the small hedge fund who got
Engine number one.
Engine number one?
Yes.
You supported that?
Yes. Yeah. We voted those shares.
This Treasury, so the pension funds still own shares in fossil fuel companies, right?
Look, we have a $140 billion portfolio, and a lot of the way that we invest that is with index investing, because it's less expensive. And when you do that, you don't get to pick individual companies. So I would suggest
but you could buy SPYX instead of SPY, right? Which excludes most fossil fuel, or people with fossil fuel reserves, at least, right?
It's a very interesting definition when people say fossil fuel companies. Lots of people have different versions of what that means in their minds. Our obligation is to the hundreds of thousands of Oregonians who are depending on our success to be able to pay their electric bills and pay their rent. So we have to do this in a responsible way. The trajectory is really clear, and we're headed in that direction. And so I'm proud of what we're doing at Treasury.
What do you say to voters who are concerned with the Treasury being invested with KKR and some of these firms that are picking up a lot of assets that are abandoned by the majors, and breathing life into these old wells and things? I mean, do you have a system in place for making sure that Oregonians' money isn't invested in this kind of activity?
Well, again, it depends a lot on what you mean by this kind of activity.
Well, I'm talking about like investing in old wells that are leaking methane. I mean, because that's a big private equity play right now. And Oregon's always been a really big player in private equity. I mean, we helped to birth KKR, right?
What we've done is add to the capacity inside Treasury to assess those risks, and we're really explicit when we talk with managers on the front end, and when we engage with them as a part of our diligence, and when they're coming back into the market and we're deciding where to invest next. We want a clear articulation of how they think about these things and how they are indicating their intention. Where
do you have a target for sort of a glide path out of this stuff, or
we have a a target that's set. Well, we have an assumed rate that the PERS board sets for the PERS system, and we have an expected rate that we calculate based on our asset allocation study. But it's not specific to. It's hard to say. Our obligation is to deliver returns. We cannot say we're going to do this because of our political feelings. We have to do that because of the risk, because risk to be avoided or upside risk in terms of returns to be sought. So it's in that context that we take on these questions, and we take them very seriously because they are going to have an impact. They have risk of lower returns, and similarly, they're big opportunities when it comes to cleaner renewables.
Are any PERS funds invested in crypto?
Not directly, I don't think, but we definitely have exposure to that indirectly because some companies that we are invested in are holding reserves. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think the one thing I would say about this, not that you're necessarily asking, is that I hear what the treasurer is saying about the return and that obligation. What the bill in the session of this year was about was just knowing what those investments are. I get that you have these, I don't know the lingo. But the idea of like knowing what those are to make decisions, from my reading,
we made that information public in December.
Right, but you just said you don't know. But do you know?
No. You're asking two different things. So the bill was about the exposure to public equity, and we've made that information public. What I said was we've not been very specific about what the definitions are. If you can tell me specifically what company in public equity.
I think a lot of people know what fossil fuel is, so I'm a little I think you could probably.
Is Amazon a fossil fuel company?
Sure, you could probably.
So we have to divest from Amazon?
Well, no, but I'm just saying, you're like, what's the definition of fossil fuel? You're the treasurer. You could make that definition. Here's all I would say is that I know that there are other pension funds in this country that are more aware of disproportional pay from CEOs to the lowest paid workers. I know that other pension funds in this country are making sure that when companies want to give their CEOs exorbitant increases, their proxy companies are saying don't vote for that. You haven't done any of that, from my understanding. So I mean, I think the idea of transparency and you can balance. It's all about balance, right? You have to have returns, but you also have to have questions that are based on the values that you bring to your job. So I'll just stop there. But
actually, it's a good opportunity for us to ask you to each ask your opponent a question. Tobias, why don't we start with you? If you'd like to ask, please make it a question that the speaker can answer and not a statement.
Sure. Well, there's a statement to set up the question, but I think you've developed a record as speaker for not being someone who sticks to their word. From your agreement to back Janelle Bynum as the first African American Speaker of the House, to your commitment to the Republicans on the redistricting committee, to your campaign pledge to protect the pension funds of teachers and firefighters and nurses. And so I'm just wondering how you plan to rebuild that trust as a governor who's going to need people to work together when so many people, legislators, people of both parties, feel like they can't trust you to keep your word.
Well, I really appreciate that question. I think it gets back to some of the earlier conversation we had at the beginning. There are some very public instances where I've had to make hard choices or decisions that people have not been happy with. But again, to be Speaker of the Oregon House for 9 years and to be able to have the success in moving important legislation and to have 60 plus current and former elected leaders who support me, I think speaks to my overall approach to this work, which is transparent, inclusive, keep confidences, be able to hold promises. I think I've done that. I mean, I think there are specific explanations for the things that you're addressing, but if that had been a pattern of my leadership, there's no way I would be Speaker for 9 years. My colleagues are supporting me across the board, not everybody, but the bulk of them are because they know that they can trust me, that I am good on my word, and that I try to get things done for people. And that at the end of the day is the best you can do. So my question for you is, and I'm probably going to get the details a little wrong because I don't follow all the things, but I'm troubled by the situation with the spyware, the Israeli company.
Pegasus.
Thank you. And we can talk about why that is, but here's my question. My understanding from reading The Guardian is that there is an individual who still works for the Treasury who was, from all reports that I've read, supportive of investing in this company, and he still has a job with you. Why haven't you held him accountable? You don't agree with this investment, do you?
I am very frustrated with what the reporting is around how NSO has acted, and I'm glad that the federal government is holding them accountable. But it's important to know how these investments work. We invest in a private equity fund. We are a limited partner, and they're a general partner. And as a result of that status, we don't get any influence on which individual companies that general partner chooses to invest in. We have serious constraints as a result of that, and my ability to speak on it is constrained as well. I find that really frustrating as well.
Constrained by whom?
Constrained by our legal status and what liability we would be exposed to as a result of that. There's definitely reporting on that as well, which I'm sure you're aware of. But I will just say that it's important to consider the sources of the reporting that you're referring to. They have some motivations as well.
Well, isn't it the case, Tobias, we talked about this the other day, that when you have a stake in a limited partnership, there's a secondary market for it?
There is.
So you could sell this investment?
I couldn't. No, we could not sell in
the limited partnership. I'm not talking about the NSO. You could sell a limited partnership that owns NSO.
In theory, if you find a buyer, and
have you tried to find a buyer?
We're always engaged in talking about what opportunities there, and it's a balancing question of risk and return, and what the prospects are going forward.
But
you will note that there's a different general partner in place now too.
You've made the case in your opening remarks that what Oregon needs is leadership that takes that acts with urgency.
Mm-hmm.
Have you acted with urgency in this matter?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
What do you mean?
I can't say much because the legal.
Who constrains you on the legal front? Is it the lawyers for the general partner?
We are a limited partner,
which means
that if we go beyond that definition of legal partner, we are exposing ourselves to significant liability on behalf of the beneficiaries, the fund.
Is this like an active-passive question? Is the LP?
Largely, yes.
Like if you start to behave as more like the GP than an LP, you get in trouble?
Right.
So did the state divest from Russian assets?
So there's about 120 to 100. Sorry,
it's been reported.
Yeah, I made a statement and directed our team to construct the fastest, most responsible plan we can to exit our investments in Russia. That's hard for a couple of reasons. The vast majority of our very limited exposures, about 0.1% of the fund, was a result of indexes, which we already described. The good news on that front is that most of the index providers are removing those from their indexes, so that takes care of most of that. But beyond that, Russian markets have been closed. Again, divest means sell. You got to find somebody who's going to buy, and that's further constrained by the sanctions that the federal government has put in place. So we're moving as quickly as we can in that direction, but it's difficult too.
You guys have been doing your homework on this.
Can I follow up on something?
Yes, you can.
Before, why didn't you? It's related to something that happened before. Why didn't you endorse your former mentor, Senator Haas, when he ran for Secretary of State?
He didn't ask me. I did help him. I did help to raise money for him and campaign for him, but he did not ask for my endorsement.
Can I ask my favorite pet garbage question?
Garbage?
Yeah.
Garbage?
So everybody I talk to about Portland is like, there's garbage everywhere, we can't stand it, it looks terrible, I don't take a friend not to visit, it just looks lousy, and it really sort of like, I mean, we're supposed to be this green state that, and you see the garbage laying around here, and you see some of the other stuff, and you're like, I think we're a tree farm with good PR. But that's beside the point. But there's garbage everywhere. We go out on Saturdays and pick it up, either with Solver and a guerrilla raid on the garbage. Is there anything you can do as governor to just clean up the streets.
Yes.
Yep.
ODOT has some authority along its.
So what would you do? What would you do like to get this?
Well, I'll tell you what I have done.
going?
When Sam Adams called me up in the 21 session and said, we need $2 million to do graffiti and garbage pickup on ODOT property, I said, sure, got it in the budget, done. Have they done it? That's a good question for ODOT, but
I can tell you,
anytime the
we-
city of Portland asked, I did it.
Okay.
So,
Well, we got 205 exactly on ODOT property, and there's still plenty of garbage.
oh, there sure is.
I mean,
Well, and I think this
We
past
can't-
session,
you
Metro
can't-
got some money to do some more, like, frankly, this is one of the things that's local. Here's what I think the governor always has a role to help fix things. Whether that's a phone call, whether it's a meeting, whether that's whatever. That's how I always approach my work as speaker. Within the confines of the legislature, if there was something I could help with, I did it. It's going to be the same approach with governor, but I do think that it's good to see Metro, I think, is getting a little bit more money to do the coordination. Before it was like, city, there was this going on, right? Somebody's got to take charge.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we got to pick up the trash.
so is your inroad ODOT? Is there any other? Do you have any other?
Well, ODOT's the most obvious one, right?
Yeah,
Because
that's
we have
where it
things
is,
along
yeah.
the roadsides. But I think any public property, right? That's owned by the state, sure. But ODOT's the big one, I would think.
So what's the plan?
Well, I agree with ODOT as a directive, but I think also the governor can convene local governments too, and say, I'm not happy with the city, the county, Metro not taking this on. I don't particularly care about whose property it is or whose jurisdiction or what budget it comes from. Let's stop making excuses and make it happen.
I am really curious why Washington County is like spending all their time picking on Bridwell instead of picking up trash, but that's a whole other conversation.
I have a gun violence question, if I can
Please.
ask it. So we're in Portland, as you know, where gun violence rates are increasing, and we're
Yep.
heading towards the summer, which historically is when gun violence is, worse than the rest of the year. So and I'm curious just to hear sort of what your plan would be to address that. And, currently, like, do you see the state government doing anything to help address gun violence in Portland? And, in addition to that, do you think that, the governor's office has any role in helping address, on a local city level, gun violence?
Yeah, I think the numbers are shocking, and it's the same example of where we need some real urgency. I think there are policy changes that need to happen. We need to ban ghost guns. We need to ban high capacity magazines. We need a statewide gun buyback program to have a safe way for guns to come out of circulation. And I think we need additional law enforcement. The state has a role to support that as well. Obviously, there needs to be appropriate accountability measures to go with that. But more people with the skills to go after gun crime and illegal gun dealers is an important part of the equation as well.
Do we need more law enforcement in Portland or statewide?
Potentially statewide, certainly in Portland, and gun violence is a problem around the state. I'm less familiar with the individual needs of other communities, but I suspect that there will be a role in certain places as well.
So you support, gun buyback programs and banning ghost guns. Do you have any policy ideas about, prosecution side of things, or addressing more of the kind of, root causes that contribute to gun violence?
Well, I think there certainly is a lot to say for interventions earlier on, so that there are alternative mechanisms to solve disputes, that we're not as quick to resort to violence. But it's the availability of guns that makes that even more common.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking the question. In the legislature under my leadership, the state has done a lot on gun violence prevention from a state policy perspective. Background checks. We still have to close the loophole on, if it takes too long to do a background check, someone could still be able to purchase a firearm. We have to close that loophole. I think as governor, making sure that the state police has the resources to move background checks as quickly as possible, so we don't have any of that happening. As speaker, we have passed safe storage legislation that if you own a gun, really thinking about how you store it, if it gets stolen, reporting it, really basic common sense things. I do think that when law enforcement came and asked for us to do more on domestic violence offenders and folks who shouldn't have access to guns, we stepped up and did that. There are too many guns out there, and by the time someone gets shot, we're already behind the 8 ball, right? It's gone to a point where it's very hard. So prevention is really important. Making sure guns are not in the hands of people who shouldn't have them to the degree that we can. That is additional enforcement of the existing laws. I also think that when a shooting does happen, one of the bills I had before I left the legislature was to invest in community violence prevention. When someone is shot, who's coming into the hospital room to talk to that person and say, hey, let's not have retribution here, let's have a conversation. How do you stop the cycle of violence? Because I do think in this, you see that someone gets, there's a shooting, then another shooting happens. You have to have that intervention to make sure you can stop what it's already, before it gets way out of hand. Look, there are too many shootings, too many guns on the streets. And there are people who feel that they need to own a firearm to feel safe. And that's why I think I'm a big fan of making sure we have appropriate law enforcement, folks who are trained to deal with violent situations. I'm a big fan of Portland Street Response. In the legislature, I supported, for the first time, state grants to communities to do things like Portland Street Response based on the Cahoots model out of Eugene, making sure there are different folks who are prepared to deal with a mental health crisis. And the reason why that's important is when there's another trained professional to do that, a police officer with a gun can go deal with a violent situation. So how you do policing and the support of the state to make sure different situations are being dealt with appropriately is really important. And for a long time, the state didn't have much of a role. It wasn't until this biennium that we started really investing state money into this. There's always been a lot of federal money in these things, but states have stepped up because we have to help communities like Portland. Because everybody across the country is dealing with crime and gun violence, but we can do more here.
Has our background check program been successful? I mean, looking at the historic rates of gun violence in this city, if that's if you're assessing it off of that, it would seem to fail largely.
Well, I think anytime you can slow down a purchase, right? Whether it's a private purchase at a gun show, which is where we went with background checks, it's important. Is that the only reason that's the only way to handle it? Of course not. I mean, there are a lot of folks who own firearms legally, but then it gets to, well, what are people doing with those firearms? And when there is a shooting, what happens after that? That response, that intervention is really important to not see escalation from there.
Can each of you share with us one big, hairy, audacious idea that will probably never pass, but if you could wave a wand, would make this state better? So,
yes.
Vera Katz wanted to cap 405, right? She also wanted to remove the tax deduction for churches and temples. Obviously never went anywhere. Big, hairy, audacious idea. That was more on a local level. Do either of you have any along those lines?
I have one, although I'm not. I hope it doesn't meet the second part of your definition that it's not going to go anywhere.
Okay.
It's big and ambitious, but I still want to try to accomplish it. I'd like to. It would require constitutional change, but I'd like to repurpose the Common School Fund from its purpose as an endowment right now into a fund that would support baby bonds to give every Oregonian at birth a nest egg that grows and is available.
So if you're born in Oregon, you automatically get like the equivalent of a zero coupon bond?
$1,000, yep.
And that's 20 grand by the time you go to college?
Yep, or community college or apprenticeships or that sort of thing, yes.
Okay.
I would argue you don't have to change the Common School Fund to do that, but nonetheless, I just look at my housing and homeless plan. That's audacious. That's hard. And we need to do it. We can end homelessness for our most vulnerable individuals in the next 2 years by focusing on vets and seniors and kids coming out of foster care. We can do that, and we have to. But the biggest item, I think, is the more audacious one, is the second bullet on that plan, which is talking about our housing supply. We will have to build 36,000 units per year for the next decade to not only make up the gap, but to get ahead of it for the people who live here now and people who are moving here. That is going to take, what I would say, I think of it a little bit, some of the efforts that you had during FDR, where you have to have this giant plan to do that. That's a workforce, that's a zoning issue, that's a supply issue, that's like, how do you actually get the money, the financing to do this? We have such a housing supply problem in the state that And my legislation in trying to figure out what the need is on track, so we will know what those numbers are at what income levels that people need housing. This isn't just low-income housing. This is workforce housing. This is housing across the board. And on day one, I'm going to be like, we're going to do this, because otherwise we're not getting ahead of this. So I'm super excited about it, and it's going to be a big deal. And frankly, we have to get it done.
We're pretty much out of time here. Aaron, can you ask the last question since you asked it so well?
So every year we have a fun question that tries to get to know you a little bit. Some years it's more
That question, no.
fun than others.
Always the hard one. No.
You know, I feel like
This was an easy one.
This one's kind of relaxed comparatively. I think in some years it's turned into a little bit of a troll. But like this time around, we've gone through 2 years of pandemic. No one would make the claim that the virus is gone or the pandemic is over. But there is a sense of it easing, I think. And for at least in day-to-day life, some of the restrictions have lifted. So to give you an example, yesterday I went across the street to Stepping Stone Cafe, where I haven't eaten in 2 years.
Oh my God, I love Stepping Stone.
And not only did I eat indoors, which is a little risky, but I also decided kind of at random to eat at the counter.
Yes.
So there I was sitting at the counter having some toast and hash browns.
Yes.
And there was this,
Yes.
and there was this feeling of, and that's how I felt, was yes, I'm back, baby.
Right.
Like, it was a very nice feeling. And so I'm just wondering, has there been a moment for either of you where you sat at the counter, so to speak, and felt that sense of relief and joy at something returning to normal? You already are nodding here.
Back to normal joy is
Yeah. Actually, most of these questions I feel ill prepared or not very smart about, but this is an easy one for me. It was when I got to be on the soccer field as an assistant coach for both our son and our daughter's team, and watching, masks on of course, but the sort of shrieking with glee of kids interacting with each other, and seeing parents on the sidelines also interacting with each other. That the sense that we were not going to be as reduced to two-dimensional images on screens and one-dimensional caricatures on social media, we're on the road back to building community.
Which teams?
Oh, West Side club soccer.
Which one?
Stuff. What are you asking?
I'm in the soccer. I'm in the soccer industrial complex. My daughter's fully.
The West Side club, the red and blue, and out in the Beaverton area. So,
Okay. Yeah. Well,
with a couple
stay
of
strong.
coaches. Yeah. It's not high level stuff. This is very rec league.
As the kids get better, the parents get worse.
Yeah. This was 3rd grade and 7th
Okay,
grade, so it
just
wasn't too intense.
call me later.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Tina?
I think it's probably two things. We live near Columbia Park, and we take our dogs there. To see just the joy, and not this, when we were in the pandemic, everyone would avoid each other, be like, we have to have all this space when we're walking our dogs. People can walk next to each other now. There's that sense of, it just feels like you can be a little closer on a path with your dog. I know that's very subtle, but you can feel it. The other thing is just watching our niece. She's in 1st grade, and just to see her playing with her friends, because, we spent a lot of time visiting with masks on, right? And now just to be able to spend time with, in the beautiful weather, and just seeing people just enjoying themselves, and just seeing in the eyes of a 1st grader, things are better. Does feel good, huh?
I know we're done. If you can't vote for yourself in the primary, is it safe for us to assume that you will vote for each other? I mean, there are several other Democrats running.
I will support a Democrat for the general election, yes.
But if you couldn't, if you couldn't vote for
Ironic,
yourself,
is that
if you
the
couldn't
same for
vote
you?
for yourself in the primary, who would you vote for?
If something happened and I couldn't vote for myself, I'd vote for Tobias.
Okay.
Same.
You vote?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Get out of here before Mark asks you to.